Well, I'm joined now by the geopolitical expert and international affairs analyst, Marco Vicenzino. Thanks for your time, Marco. Firstly, this is the highest level meeting between Cuba and the US in over 50 years. What does it mean?
I mean, there's significance. I mean, remember, Bill Clinton met with Fidel Castro on the sidelines of a UN meeting in 2000. They actually shook hands. Barack Obama shook hands with Raul Castro at Nelson Mandela's funeral in South Africa in 2013. So this has, symbolically speaking, it's a very high symbolism. But in terms to call it historic, unless there's a real change to relations, I would reserve the use of the term historic.
Yeah. Well, the fact that they had bilateral talks is what many people are saying is making it historic.
Bilateral talks, yes. I mean, John Kerry, together with the Cuban foreign minister, had a long meeting where they were discussing several issues. But in terms of the two directly having, there's certain lines that they'll speak about, but certain areas that they really won't go beyond. They're trying to reach a dialogue. A dialogue is healthy, to have a diplomatic dialogue between countries. But to actually make a sincere and true change in relations, that I think is limited. Once again, it's until the lifting of the embargo. That would be the historic change in the use of the word historic.
Yeah. So obviously there are reports already saying that the US has decided to remove Cuba from its list of countries which support terrorism. What would that mean for Cuba?
Basically, Cuba would want that. First, symbolically, it gives them legitimacy at the international level. Secondly, and most importantly, it gives them access to aid and support internationally to multilateral agencies around the world, development agencies, once they're removed from that status. So it's having access to credit, which they haven't had before. So this economically will help them out. My question about that is that when you do negotiations, and negotiations is a game of give and take, the U.S. is conferring that status upon Cuba, but what is it getting in return? At this stage, it doesn't seem to be much because, once again, we look at Cuba, there's still active support for the FARC and the ELN terrorist movements of Colombia. Secondly, Cuba, in a UN report last year, was clearly condemned for supplying arms in violation of UN sanctions from Cuba to North Korea. And thirdly, in Cuban custody, within Cuba right now is a woman who killed a New Jersey state trooper cold blood in the early 70s and is living in Cuba, and the Cuban government made it clear they're not going to give it back to the U.S. government. So there's things beyond that, but those things three clearly. So what I would say is that before you confer a status, there has to be a process of give and take, and we haven't seen that yet.
And that would be one of the main reasons that Republicans are so hard on Barack Obama for trying to push ahead with relationship with Cuba.
Listen, there's obviously there's extreme dislike between the White House and the Republican-controlled Congress. That's absolutely no secret. If you look at the Iranian negotiation process, which has been taking place for over 10 years, there's been a process of give and take with the Iranians. And the Iranians basically are, they're conceding a bit, but the next 3 months are going to be a very, very important process in finalizing an agreement. But with Cuba, things were signed on December 17, 2014. There's been a process that's taking place, but still throughout that process, there's been, in my opinion, there's been no concessions from the Cubans while the U.S. is giving. So there needs to be more giving on the Cuban side.
All right, let's see if we just hold it there, Marco, and let's hear what the President is saying in Panama City.
Part of that growth process, all of us here have to deal with that, and that includes in the United States, by the way. Because one of the challenges that we're all facing when you look at global growth patterns is that even when economies are growing, the gaps between rich and poor oftentimes are accelerating. And not only is that not good for social stability, not only is that not good for opportunity, it's not good for business. Because the truth of the matter is that when you have a growing middle class and an aspirational poor that are able to access their way into the middle class, then those become the consumers that drive the marketplace, much more so than folks at the very top. There's only so much food you can eat. There's only so many cars you can buy. And at a certain point, if only folks at the top are doing well and we're not focused on broad-based growth, then growth starts to stall. And so taking the steps to train, to educate, to give access to opportunity, to make sure that infrastructure is reaching every place and not just some places, that becomes a very high priority.
And of course, President Barack Obama, they're speaking about business and the impact it can or can't have. How important is a relationship with Cuba in terms of business in both the U.S. and Cuba?
For the Cubans, it means a lot. They obviously they need the foreign direct investment. And right now they're looking at if they can get $2.5 billion a year in foreign direct investment, their economy is on the proper course. From a U.S. perspective, the Cuban economy is it's an opportunity, but it's only 11 million people, fairly equivalent to the Dominican Republic. In that sense, for any multinational company, for private sector investors, it's not going to make or break their profitability. There's other markets in Latin America, Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, which are far larger markets. Yeah. So in that sense, I would say is that for the Cubans, it means a lot, foreign direct investments. For American companies, it could help. It's value added, could be value added, but it's not going to be essential or material to their annual profits.
It might not be essential in the U.S., but there are very many shops and cigar stores in particular who are boasting about how soon it would be for them to go and get more Cuban cigars into the country. So it'll have some sort of impact in the U.S. as well, wouldn't it?
I would say, yeah, for certain sectors, for people who are involved in the tobacco industry, of course, yeah. People who are shops, there's a big demand for Cuban cigars, and there's also many places that sell it, quote unquote, you can say illegally, but have been the ability to do so over the years. But once again, that remains an illicit trade. Yeah. It's not going to make or break the economy of the United States.
Yeah, definitely won't, but it'll make some people happy, all right?
if in their recreational time, of course.
Thanks so much. Marco
Thank you.
Vicenzino, International Affairs Analyst.